Today we will look at who Gaius Julius Caesar was, and also find out why he continues to be an example in the modern world. We will get to know in detail his secrets of success and look at his ordinary life. I think we can begin. Let's first figure out who exactly Julius Caesar was. Gaius Julius Caesar is a name that instantly conjures up images of power, conquests, and, of course, political intrigue. He was born in the 100th year BC. This Roman patrician not only left a huge mark on our history, but also actually changed its course. He transformed the Roman Republic into an empire. His life was a whole collection of incredible ups and downs, brilliant military campaigns, cunning political maneuvers, and, of course, romantic dramas. Caesar was a very interesting and versatile personality. A brilliant commander, a charismatic orator, an insightful politician, and even a talented writer. His path to power was incredibly difficult and filled with dangers. Starting from a relatively humble position, he gradually, step by step, was able to climb the steps of the Roman hierarchy, using his incomparable talents and incredible energy. From the Gallic plains to the Egyptian palaces, from the forum to the battlefields, Caesar everywhere demonstrated a unique combination of iron willpower, strategic thinking, and, of course, the ability to inspire people. Because these are some of the most important strategies for a successful ruler. But you may have a question: why is his success so relevant even after 2 millennia? And all because the principles that Caesar was guided by were universal. They concerned leadership, management, communication, strategic planning, and personal effectiveness. And these in turn were qualities that are in demand in any field of activity and in any era. Studying his secrets, today we will receive not only historical information, but also valuable lessons that can be applied to our lives in the field of business and politics. Well, let's get down to the secrets. And the first of them is Caesar's military thinking and, of course, tactics. Gaius Julius Caesar's military victories were not an accident or a result of pure luck. They were the result of a profound understanding of the psychology of war, strategic thinking, unprecedented logistics, and unmatched tactical mastery. He did not just command armies, he even created them, formed them, and turned them into an invincible force that was capable of defeating any enemy, often even one significantly superior in numbers. First, we will look at some of the principles of the ruler. And one of Caesar's most striking principles, expressed in his famous phrase, "I came, I saw, I conquered," was the incredible speed of decision-making and action. While his opponents hesitated, thought, and deliberated, Caesar was already moving. He could march at a speed that seemed impossible for an entire army, and thus, with the chosen strategy, he caught the enemy by surprise and deprived him of the opportunity to adequately respond. This principle was especially effective in the vast territories of Gaul, where the local tribes, although numerous, often acted separately and did not have time to unite their forces before the arrival of the Romans. An example of such a battle is the Battle of Zela, where Caesar marched against Pharnaces II, king of Pontus, who took advantage of his absence in Asia Minor. Instead of waiting for reinforcements or gathering forces, Caesar, who had just arrived from Egypt, immediately went to the enemy with a small force. In just 5 days, he not only reached Pharnaces, but also defeated him in a battle that lasted only a few hours. This rapid campaign demonstrated his principle of speed, and was the one after which he uttered his famous phrase. A second example of such battles is the rapid crossings of the Alps. At the beginning of the Gallic Wars, Caesar often demonstrated the ability of his legions to make forced marches through difficult mountain passes. This was done in order to suddenly appear in the rear or on the flank of the Gallic tribes, who did not expect such a quick arrival of the Roman army. He often used night marches or movements in bad weather to conceal his movements, which added an element of surprise. Logistics and engineering cannot be ignored, as Caesar's army was not just a collection of soldiers, but a highly efficient system that was capable of remaking the landscape and overcoming any obstacle. Caesar understood perfectly well that wars are won not only in battle, but also through superior logic, engineering training, and the ability to use available resources as weapons. His legionaries were not just warriors, but also skilled builders, capable of constructing roads, bridges, and fortifications with speed and efficiency. In fact, during the Gallic Wars, Caesar astounded the Gauls and his Roman contemporaries by building 2 bridges across the Rhine River in a short period of time. These bridges had no strategic necessity for a long stay in enemy territory, but they were a powerful psychological weapon. They demonstrated to the Gauls that Rome could come anywhere, anytime, regardless of natural obstacles, and that its engineering capabilities were limitless. This was able to undermine the enemy's confidence and forced him to acknowledge the superiority of the Romans. Let's also talk about the greatest siege robots. The Siege of Alesia is the pinnacle of Roman engineering and Caesar's genius. He besieged Vercingetorix and his army in a fortified city, but at the same time faced a huge Gallic relief army. In response, Caesar ordered the construction of a double system of fortifications, an inner one to protect against the besieged and an outer one to defend against the arriving relief. This ring fortress, with towers, ditches, palisades, and traps, was built in an incredibly short time. Caesar also paid attention to the supply of his armies, which was important for long campaigns. He carefully planned routes, created food depots, and maintained discipline in the baggage train. An important aspect of his rule was, of course, discipline and training. This was a special transformation of legionaries into an elite, because the Roman legions under Caesar were not just military units, but a highly motivated and trained elite, whose loyalty to Caesar often exceeded loyalty to the Senate or Rome. He did not just ask for discipline, he instilled it and maintained it through constant training, personal example, a fair but firm attitude, and the formation of deep personal attachment. Of course, Caesar was always at the forefront, sharing with his soldiers all the hardships of camp life and the dangers of battle. He fought alongside them, and this inspired deep respect and loyalty. During the Battle of Alesia, for example, he personally rode around the positions, inspiring the fighters, appearing in those places where the enemy pressure was the strongest. He never asked his men to do anything that he would not do himself, and this formed unquestioning trust. Let's now look at training and maneuvers in more detail. Caesar's legionaries were constantly on the move and trained in new tactics. He improved their skills in handling weapons, maneuvering in formation, and performing engineering work. The training was tough, but it ensured that in battle each soldier knew his role and could act as part of a single machine. Caesar even cultivated a strong sense of loyalty and belonging to the legion, and through it, to himself personally. He knew many of his soldiers by name, remembered their achievements, and of course rewarded them generously. He also allowed the legionaries to keep a portion of the spoils, which was a powerful material incentive. One of his favorite tactics was tactics in chaos. Caesar was not only a brilliant planner, but also a master of improvisation. He could quickly adapt to changing situations on the battlefield, instantly reorganizing his troops and changing tactics if the original plan failed or new opportunities opened up. One of the most striking examples of such tactics was the Battle of Pharsalus. This was one of the most significant battles of the Civil War, where Caesar's army was significantly smaller than Pompey's army. Caesar noticed that Pompey was planning to use his numerous cavalry to outflank and attack the Roman infantry from the rear. In response, Caesar covertly deployed his reserve force, which consisted of 6 cohorts that were not usually used in the front line of battle. When Pompey's cavalry began to attack, this reserve suddenly jumped out of ambush and attacked the horsemen with spears. This prevented Pompey's attack from taking place and turned the tide of battle, as well as leading to a decisive victory for Caesar. This decision, taken in the heat of battle, demonstrated his genius. Caesar, like no other, knew how to use the landscape to his advantage. Be it rivers, hills, forests, or swamps, he turned them from obstacles into tactical advantages. He could force the enemy to fight on unfavorable terrain or use cover for unexpected maneuvers. Caesar also understood perfectly well that war is not only a physical clash, but also a struggle of wills. He actively used psychological methods to demoralize the enemy and raise the fighting spirit of his troops. One of these tactics was mercy to the vanquished. After some victories, Caesar demonstrated generosity to prisoners and even defeated enemies, which was unusual for that time. This helped to reduce resistance and win over those who had not yet fought against him, or those who had been defeated but could become an ally in the future. His policy of mercy to citizens who fought on the side of Pompey played an important role in his political dominance after the Civil War. He also used rapid advance and surprise. Since the already mentioned speed of marches and surprise attacks often threw the enemy into panic, it deprived him of the will to resist and forced him to make hasty, erroneous decisions. Of course, the construction of the Rhine Bridge, the grandeur of the siege works at Alesia, as well as public demonstrations of Roman engineering power and discipline. All these were not only military, but also powerful psychological moves that showed the unshakable power and determination of Rome and its commander. Thus, the secret of Caesar's military victories was a complex combination of excellent training, incredible speed, engineering thinking, discipline, tactical flexibility, and a deep understanding of the psychology of war. He was not just a warrior, but a man who thought big and acted decisively. And we move on to the second secret of influence and the secrets of his communication. Julius Caesar was not only a master of the sword, but also not stingy with words. His ability to convince, inspire, and manipulate people was one of the main qualities of success. He knew how to communicate with the most diverse layers of society, from a simple soldier to a senator, and each time found the right tone and arguments. Caesar had incredible charisma, and it was this that attracted people to him. It was not just external charm, but a deep quality that manifested itself in his confidence, determination, and, importantly, in his ability to inspire trust. For example, many of his soldiers were ready to follow him through fire and water, not only because of fear of punishment or hope for reward, but because of personal loyalty. They believed in him and his destiny. He also skillfully used his name and pedigree, associating himself with the mythical founders of Rome, which gave his person greatness and divine patronage. Of course, Roman politics required outstanding oratorical skills, and Caesar was one of the best of his time, although his speeches are not as widely preserved as those of Cicero. He studied rhetoric in Greece and applied this knowledge in practice. Unlike some of his contemporaries, who were prone to long speeches, Caesar was known for his clarity of presentation. His speeches were direct, logical, and easy for his audience to understand. This was especially appreciated by soldiers who needed clear and motivating information. He knew how to influence the emotions of the crowd, be it anger, fear, or admiration. He knew how to motivate legionaries before a battle or calm a raging crowd in the forum. There were also the so-called commentaries on the Gallic War. This is not just a historical account, but also an example of propaganda. Caesar wrote it in the third person, thus creating the image of an impartial observer, but at the same time skillfully emphasizing his achievements, justifying his actions to the Senate and the people, and forming his heroic image. It was a letter addressed to the entire Roman Republic, demonstrating his military successes. Caesar did not forget about populism and influence on public opinion. He was the first great master of populism in history. He understood the power of the people's voice and skillfully used it for his political purposes. He also spent huge sums on organizing gladiatorial games, theatrical performances, and feasts for the people. This brought him great popularity among the common people, who made up a significant part of the voters and were ready to support him, even despite the decision of the aristocracy. Over time, Caesar proposed and implemented reforms that benefited ordinary citizens, such as land grants for veterans and the poor. This built up his base of supporters, and he often spoke directly to the people, explaining his actions and criticizing his opponents, thereby bypassing the traditional political channels that were controlled by the Senate. His relationship with the legionaries should not be overlooked either, for they were a model of effective leadership. He was not an aloof general. He was their comrade, sharing their hardships and dangers. Caesar knew many of his soldiers by name, which was incredible in an army of thousands. This gave each one a sense of personal importance and connection to their commander. He generously rewarded those who distinguished themselves, publicly celebrated their bravery and valor, which served as a powerful incentive for others. He even ate the same food, slept in the same conditions as his soldiers, and never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. This generated deep respect and loyalty. Caesar was certainly strict, but fair. He could punish disobedience harshly, but he also showed mercy and forgiveness when appropriate, which maintained a balance between fear and love. His decisions, such as forgiving the rebels in the plebeian legion, showed his flexibility and insight. And beyond his public appearances, Caesar was a master of behind-the-scenes intrigue and political deals. He skillfully used personal connections, financial obligations, and the ambitions of others to advance his interests. For example, forming an informal alliance with Gnaeus Pompey and Marcus Crassus was a stroke of genius. He pooled their resources and influence to circumvent the Senate's resistance, demonstrating his ability to forge pragmatic and powerful alliances. Caesar was also known for always being on top of things and using information as a tool of power. He had an extensive network of informants and spies, not to forget that in his dealings with opponents he often used the principle of divide and conquer. So he set enemies against each other or found solutions for compromises. Ultimately, Caesar understood that words and ideas could be as powerful weapons as swords and spears. His communication skills and deep understanding of human psychology allowed him to conquer not only territories but also the hearts of people, which was essential to maintaining power and realizing his grand plans. And we move on to his third seret, which was organization and discipline. Of course, many might have thought that Gaius Julius Caesar was a man who could do everything at once, achieving outstanding results. But this is not so, because behind his stunning military victories and political triumphs stood iron discipline, unique self-organization skills, and an amazing ability to multitask. He was the embodiment of Roman courage, which included not only bravery but also efficiency and pursuit of goals. Caesar was known for his ability to work without fatigue or interruption. Ancient authors often mentioned his amazing stamina. I managed to find some fascinating information about his sleep. There is evidence that Caesar slept very little, often only a few hours a day, especially during military campaigns or periods of intense political activity. He could fall asleep on the move or in a cart, using every free minute for rest, and this allowed him to maintain a high level of activity. In fact, even in old age, when other politicians preferred rest, Caesar continued to personally lead military operations, make long marches, and actively participate in state affairs. His energy seemed endless, but one of Caesar's most striking qualities was his ability to concentrate on several tasks at once and carry them out efficiently. Plutarch and other biographers wrote that Caesar could dictate letters or orders to two or even several scribes at the same time, each writing down a separate document. This required not just quick thinking, but the ability to switch between different thoughts instantly and still maintain clarity. This allowed him to process a huge volume of correspondence and make decisions on many issues in a short time. And even during the most intense campaigns, he found time to read and write, often dictating his commentaries or other works while traveling or during short breaks between battles. But we should not forget that Caesar not only demanded discipline from his soldiers, but also lived by strict rules himself. His personal life was organized, and this allowed him to use his time as efficiently as possible. Caesar had a personal schedule that helped him maintain efficiency, but an exact hourly schedule has not been preserved. It was known that Caesar got up early, worked a lot, and personally controlled many aspects of his affairs. From military to political, his day was scheduled and filled with actions. But he did not just give orders, but he himself demonstrated an example of hard work and endurance. And this inspired his subordinates and soldiers to follow his example. It is also known that Caesar did not sit still. His life was constantly moving, and he knew how to use the time on the road for work. In his notes, he described the incredible distances he covered with his army. He was always ahead, leading the troops, which was unusual for a commander of such a level. On the road, he could engage in dictation, study maps, receive reports, and even plan future actions. And his ability to quickly move between regions not only gave him a tactical advantage, but also allowed him to personally control many processes, from military to administrative, without entrusting them completely to others. But it is worth mentioning that his discipline was also demonstrated in his ability to take quick and decisive action without getting stuck in long deliberations or fear of making a mistake. Although he acted quickly, his decisions were not rash. He was able to quickly analyze available information, weigh the risks and benefits, and make the best decision under uncertainty. Caesar was also not afraid to take risks when necessary to achieve his goals. This required great confidence in his abilities and the ability to cope with possible negative consequences. Crossing the Rubicon is a perfect example of such determination. Although Caesar worked hard, he also understood the importance of effective rest. He was known to love literature, poetry, philosophy, and used these activities for mental recovery. He was also the author of several books, including commentaries on the Gallic War and commentaries on the Civil War, and he also wrote poetry. These activities were not only a way of self-expression, but also a form of intellectual relaxation that allowed him to switch off, and Caesar's ability to quickly switch between intense work and short periods of rest or intellectual activity was key to maintaining his productivity for decades. Thus, Caesar's daily life was a model of efficiency, discipline, and the ability to make the most of his abilities. His ability to multitask, sleep little, and work under any conditions became legendary and laid the foundation for his incredible achievements. And now we come to the fourth secret, and it was his ability to make decisions quickly and change strategy. In fact, the world of Gaius Julius Caesar was far from stable. Constant wars, political intrigues, and rapid changes required not just the ability to follow a plan, but also an outstanding ability to adapt and introduce new things. Caesar was not a conservative clinging to outdated methods. On the contrary, he was an innovator who saw opportunities where others saw only obstacles, and was not afraid to break patterns. But unlike many of his contemporaries, who adhered strictly to established Roman military doctrines, Caesar was willing to depart from them when the situation demanded it. In his battles, he often employed unconventional maneuvers that confounded his opponents accustomed to standard Roman or barbarian tactics. For example, his ability to move troops quickly or use cavalry to break through to the rear, rather than just for flanking attacks. Also important was the fact that Caesar could change the battle plan on the battlefield if he discovered a weak point in the enemy or new circumstances. The Battle of Pharsalus, where he secretly deployed an infantry reserve to counter Pompey's cavalry, was a great example of this flexibility. He anticipated the enemy's move and prepared an asymmetrical response. Also, building a bridge across the Rhine was not just an engineering feat, but also a tactical innovation. It was an atypical move that demonstrated to the Gauls that Rome could come anywhere, anytime, regardless of natural obstacles. It was not just about crossing a river. Such a strategy was aimed at psychological effect. Let us also remember that Caesar actively introduced new methods, not only in tactics, but also in the organization of the army and methods of warfare. His legionaries were trained to build fortifications incredibly quickly, as we have already said, which allowed them to create impregnable camps anywhere and in a short time, providing security and a base for subsequent operations. One of these methods was siege machines. Although many siege technologies were known before Caesar, he significantly improved their use, making sieges more efficient and faster. His armies used towers, battering rams, and other machines. But Caesar did not limit himself to known technologies. He was constantly looking for ways to make his troops more effective. This concerned not only weapons, but also the methods of their use, logistics, and even medical care. You might think that since he had so much glory, he did not listen to anyone else. But this is not so. Caesar was not arrogant and was ready to learn even from his opponents if he saw something useful in their actions. In Gaul, he also encountered completely new tactics and methods of warfare for the Romans from the Gallic tribes. Caesar studied their strengths and weaknesses and adapted his methods to combat them. Since Caesar did not stand still, he introduced various reforms, but after coming to power, Caesar did not limit himself to military reforms, but also showed himself to be an outstanding reformer of the state. One of these reforms was the calendar reform. This is Caesar's most famous civil reform. He realized the shortcomings of the old Roman calendar and, with the help of the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes, introduced a new, accurate calendar, which is used with minor changes in our day. This demonstrated his attention to practical needs and desire to improve everyday life. There were also various reforms in Rome and administrative changes. He carried out large-scale construction projects in Rome, created new public buildings, improved the infrastructure. Caesar redistributed land, fought corruption, and introduced new laws to regulate life in the provinces and in Rome itself. He expanded civil rights, which was a revolutionary step for that time. It is also worth mentioning that he paid great attention to more effective management of the provinces, reducing the arbitrariness of governors. But we all know that innovation always involves risk. However, Caesar was not afraid to make mistakes and was not paralyzed by the fear of failure. He was willing to try new approaches, even if they were not the same as the established norms. An example of this was crossing the Rubicon. This act was a manifestation of his willingness to take risks and break the rules for his goal. It is not just a military decision, but more a demonstration of his willingness to radically change and ignore traditional limitations. He certainly trusted his own judgment more than tradition, and this allowed him to make bold and unconventional decisions. Thus, the secret of Caesar's adaptability and innovation lay in his intellectual flexibility. His willingness to experiment, his ability to quickly redesign his plans in response to changing circumstances, and his desire to improve in all areas of his activities. He was not just a soldier. Now let's move on to the fifth secret, and it was Caesar's determination and ambition. Everyone knows that ambition is the driving force behind great achievements. Caesar's was boundless, but at the same time, it was aimed at specific, conscious goals. He didn't just want power for the sake of power. He wanted it to realize his vision of Rome and his place in history. This determination, which bordered on obsession, allowed him to overcome any obstacles and go to the end. In fact, Caesar had demonstrated a desire for outstanding achievements from a young age. He was not satisfied with the usual career growth of a Roman patrician. He wanted to be the first, the most influential, the most famous. There was even a fascinating legend about Macedonian. It said that upon seeing the statue of Alexander the Great in Spain, Caesar burst into tears, realizing that by his age, Alexander had already conquered half the world, and he himself had not yet reached such heights. Also, each step on the ladder of honors, from military tribune to consul, was not just a goal for him, but a whole step towards greater power and influence. He built his career using all the levers available to him, and eventually Caesar came to the understanding that only sole power would allow him to carry out his grandiose reforms and stabilize Rome. This was his main ambition. It is also a well-known fact that Caesar did not live for today. His ambitions were supported by the ability to see and plan his actions for many years ahead, thinking through possible obstacles and developing long-term strategies. For example, we can recall the campaign in Gaul, which lasted 8 years, and it was not just a conquest of provinces. It was a carefully planned operation to create a personal army, accumulate wealth, gain glory, and win support among the legionaries who would become his support in future political battles in Rome. Caesar also did not forget about the importance of preparing for the civil war. Long before crossing the Rubicon, Caesar understood that a conflict with Pompey and the Senate was inevitable. He consistently weakened his opponents, strengthened his positions, and created conditions for his victory. But Caesar's path was not as easy and miraculous as it might seem. He experienced political defeats, financial difficulties, personal tragedies, and military failures. However, he never gave up and always moved on. One of the difficulties in his life was debts. In his youth, Caesar was burdened with huge debts that should have buried his career. However, he used them as an incentive for active action, considering them as an investment in the future. Also, in his youth, he was captured by pirates, but even in captivity he remained calm, joked about his captors, and promised to crucify them. Of course, when the opportunity arose, he happily fulfilled this promise. And this demonstrates his determination and strength of character. It is also worth remembering that during the Gallic Wars, he faced serious uprisings and threats. For example, the rebellion of Vercingetorix and the siege of Alesia were critical moments when his army could have been destroyed. However, Caesar did not panic, but did everything for the good of his army. But the crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BC was the moment when Caesar consciously crossed the point of no return. He knew that this step meant civil war for him, and that he would either win or die. His willingness to take this risk showed how determined he was. Caesar was also a master at exploiting any opportunity, however small, to advance his interests and goals. He was always ready to take advantage of the situation. A good example of his ability to create powerful, albeit temporary, alliances to achieve specific goals was the creation of the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, as well as subsequent political marriages. But he was not afraid to go against public opinion or tradition if it brought him closer to his goal. He fought to the end. Also, Caesar's ambition and determination were based on his unique character, a combination of self-confidence, self-analysis, cold calculation, and of course fearlessness. Decisiveness and conviction in his own rightness played a significant role because he always acted decisively, without hesitation, which gave his actions strength and persuasiveness. And Caesar was deeply convinced that his actions were aimed at the good of Rome, even if they did not coincide with the interests of the Senate. This conviction gave him moral support. Thus, Caesar's boundless ambitions, which were supported by strategic thinking, an incredible will to win, and the ability to overcome any difficulties, became the foundation for all his great achievements. He was a man who did not just dream, but systematically built his path to the heights of power and glory. And now we finally come to the last but equally important secret of Caesar, namely his ability to manage public opinion. In fact, in ancient Rome, where the popular assembly and the support of the plebs played a key role in political life, the ability to influence public opinion was vital. And Gaius Julius Caesar was an unrivaled master of this strategy. He did not simply react to the mood of the crowd, he actively shaped it, using all the tools available to him, from lavish spectacles to written texts and public speeches. Caesar, of course, understood perfectly well that despite the might of the Senate, true power in Rome often emanated from the people. He purposefully cultivated his popularity among the plebs, making them his support against the aristocratic opposition. In fact, Caesar was originally a representative of the popular party, which stood for the interests of the people against the Optimates, who were in turn oriented toward the aristocracy. He used these ideas to win widespread support. His first moves on the political battlefield often included proposals to distribute land to veterans and poor citizens. This directly improved the lives of many people and earned him gratitude and loyalty. I will tell you that Caesar was another of those who sought to expand civil rights, which was revolutionary and attracted the people of Italy and the provinces to his side. But it should not be overlooked that Caesar understood the power of spectacle as a tool for control and winning the sympathy of the masses. He spent money on public events that left a lasting impression. Caesar, among other things, organized gladiatorial games of unprecedented scale and splendor. The grander the games, the more delighted the people were. And of course, he organized generous feasts and food distributions, which were especially important for the poor. This directly linked his name with prosperity and celebration, and his triumphs after military victories were not just parades, but carefully planned performances. They demonstrated the wealth, power of Rome, and Caesar's personal glory, while strengthening his heroic image in the eyes of the people. Trophies, captives, treasures, all this helped to emphasize his greatness. Now let's take a closer look at propaganda and Caesar's personality, since he was one of the first to systematically use the written word and public speaking to spread the necessary information. A striking example of this was, of course, the commentaries on the Gallic War. As already mentioned, this work was not just a military report, but also a brilliant example of propaganda. Written in the third person, they presented Caesar as an invincible commander, the savior of Rome from the barbarians and a just leader. The book was distributed throughout Rome and was even read in schools, thus forming a heroic image of Caesar for several generations. Caesar often addressed the people directly, without regard for the Senate, through speeches in the Forum or the publication of decrees, all of which allowed him to directly convey his point of view, explain his actions, and discredit his enemies. However, after his triumph, Caesar began minting coins with his image, an unprecedented step for a living Roman figure who had previously been the preserve of the gods and deified emperors. This further helped to strengthen his status and emphasize his exceptionalism. Also, when Caesar came to power, he took steps to control the dissemination of information. A publication called the Daily Acts was the first of its kind, a newspaper published daily in Rome, containing official news, decisions of the Senate, and decrees of the magistrates. Caesar used it to control the agenda and present events in a favorable light for himself. It was a tool for shaping public opinion. Although Caesar was known for his mercy, he also knew how to suppress criticism and eliminate sources of negative information when necessary. Let's not forget that Caesar had an irresistible charisma that allowed him to win the hearts of people. He promised stability, peace after decades of civil wars, justice and prosperity, and this was exactly what the people desperately needed. Even in times of chaos and uncertainty, Caesar offered a clear path to stability and the restoration of Rome's greatness, which inspired many. He positioned himself as a savior who could lead the Republic out of its troubles. Thus, the secret of Caesar's management of public opinion was his understanding of psychology, his willingness to spend resources to win their sympathies, his ability to use propaganda and information channels, as well as his own charisma, which played a large role and allowed him to become, for many, not just a politician, but even a folk hero and a symbol of hope. Ultimately, the life and career of Gaius Julius Caesar was filled with brilliant victories, political upheavals, and personal dramas, ending with his tragic assassination in 44 BC. However, his death did not end his influence. On the contrary, it became the catalyst for Rome's final transition from republic to empire, a process he himself had begun. Caesar thus redrew the political map of the Mediterranean. His conquest of Gaul extended the Roman Empire to the ocean and the Rhine, laying the foundation for the future French and German states. His victory in the Civil War and the subsequent concentration of power in one hand demonstrated the inadequacy of republican institutions in the context of a growing empire and was able to open the way for principate and imperial power. Roman emperors thereafter proudly bore the title Caesar because it became synonymous with supreme power. His comments on the Gallic War continue to be studied as models of Latin prose and military history. The Julian calendar he introduced was one of the most accurate in the ancient world and remained so for many centuries. His very name, Caesar, gave rise to the words king and Kaiser, becoming a common noun for a monarch. Although Caesar lived in a completely different era, his methods and principles of success remain surprisingly relevant. Caesar's actions showed that achieving greatness requires not just ambition, but also a clear vision of the future and a willingness to pursue the goal, overcoming any obstacles. He was not afraid to dream and think big. His example also shows us that effective leadership is based on a combination of personal example, a deep understanding of human psychology and communication skills. The ability to inspire, persuade, and understand, be it an army or a nation, is invaluable in our time. In an ever-changing world, the ability to quickly adapt to new conditions and innovate is the key to survival and success. Caesar did not cling to old methods if he saw more effective ways. An incredible ability to multitask and a willingness to work harder than anyone else were the basis of his productivity and allowed him to succeed where others would surely give up. And of course, he thought not only tactically but also strategically, planning years ahead and anticipating the consequences of his actions. Ultimately, Gaius Julius Caesar was more than just a general or a politician. He was a true leader of change, a man who challenged the established order and rebuilt it in his own image. His story is a timeless reminder of what human will, intellect, and ambition can do when they are directed toward achieving grandiose goals. Caesar was also not only a tactician, but also a good military engineer. The construction of a bridge across the Rhine in 10 days or the siege works around Alesia are striking examples of his ability to quickly build complex engineering structures. These projects not only gave him an advantage, but also impressed his enemies, demonstrating the power and ingenuity of the Roman army under his command. Through his personal qualities and knowledge, he built an army that was not just a collection of soldiers, but a tool devoted to him personally. His legionaries were well-trained, disciplined, and motivated. Caesar paid great attention to their welfare, providing generous rewards and caring for veterans. He knew each of his centurions by name, which created a personal bond and strengthened loyalty. This loyalty was a key factor in the Civil War, when his soldiers were willing to fight against Rome for their commander. Let us remember that Caesar was a renowned orator. Although his speeches have not survived in their entirety, ancient authors note his eloquence, wit, and ability to persuade his audience. He skillfully used rhetorical devices to influence the emotions of the crowd, inspire his soldiers, and discredit his opponents. His speeches in the Forum were a powerful tool for direct communication with the people, and he also demonstrated his courage and ignored senatorial censorship. In conclusion, Caesar's methods of managing people, shaping public opinion, and waging war have continued to be studied in academic circles and business schools. His example demonstrates the importance of strategic thinking, adaptability, the ability to inspire and persuade, and effectiveness in achieving goals. He was a man who turned ideas about what was possible upside down, and his story remains a powerful reminder of the potential of human will and ambition. So Julius Caesar was a figure of colossal proportions, who not only changed the course of Roman history, but also left an indelible mark on world culture and politics.